So two very small, very subtle, underreported rule changes happened last offseason, and all of a sudden, one of the most important defensive players on your team is actually the kicker. And that's only like half an exaggeration. If I told you that you could sign a defensive lineman right now that 4 to 5 times per game could just make the offense lose 10 yards, and then also once per game could delete a scoring drive pretty much on their own, how much do you think that would be worth to a football team? Probably a lot, right? Well, that's exactly what a few kickers around the league have figured out how to do, and they've done it by both, again, taking advantage of a couple new rule changes and also perfecting a brand new knuckleball kicking technique that is just giving returners hell. It's not that often that I can say that there's a revolution happening in football, but when it comes to special teams, there is absolutely a revolution happening in football. So whether you're a special teams nerd or you're just really fascinated in how pro football teams exploit rule changes, today's show is for you. But before we get into it, I want to thank Factor for making today's episode possible in the first place. If you haven't heard of them before, Factor ships fresh, never frozen, dietitian-approved meals right to your doorstep. All of the meals can be heated up in the microwave in just 2 minutes. They taste great, and there's a ton of variety as well. Over 80 different meal options per week, to be exact, including double the seafood options they used to have, and more premium seafood options too, like salmon, shrimp, and barramundi at no additional cost. There's also a lot more choices in their global cuisines range, including new Asian and Mediterranean meal options as well. I mean, whatever you could want for your taste preference or dietary needs, they've got it. And the best part is it cuts down on the amount of meal prepping and grocery shopping that you have to do every single week as well. So if you're interested in getting meals that can be made fast, eaten conveniently, and taste good, all delivered right to your door, check out Factor at factor75.com at the link in the description below. Use promo code FILMROOMFB50. That's going to get you a 50% discount and free breakfast for a year. Again, that is promo code FILMROOMFB50 at factor75.com. That promo code is going to get you a 50% discount and free breakfast for a year for new Factor customers. Thank you once again to Factor for sponsoring today's show. And with that, let's talk about kickers. On a micro level, football is about blocking and tackling, but on a macro level, it's about field position and drive efficiency. As you would probably expect, the shorter a drive is based on its starting field position, the more likely, on average, that drive is to score. If you slice up the minus half of the field, meaning the offense's own half, into 5 different sections of 10 yards each, you can see just how much these different potential starting field positions affects the likelihood to score from those spots. Keep in mind, these are league average numbers. Obviously, they can vary from team to team, but when looking at the league as a whole, when they start drives inside their own 10-yard line, they have an average scoring drive percentage of just 26.2%, and that's based on full season data from 2024. When moving the starting field position out to between the 11 and 20-yard line, they get a slight bump up to 27.4%, and then we start to see progressively larger increases from there. Drives starting in the 20s score at a 37.5% clip, so that's a pretty big bump on its own, while drives starting in the 30s scored a 42.6% clip. And then finally, drives starting between their own 40 and midfield scored a whopping 50.4% rate. So overall, the goal for any team is to just play the odds and have as many of their opponent's drives start from as bad of a starting field position as possible. No matter how bad your defense is, any unit is going to benefit from that field position advantage. And no matter how good an offense is, they're going to have a significant obstacle to overcome if they have to get an extra 10 to 15 yards per drive just to get into scoring range. Which, of course, brings us to one of the most consequential rule changes in modern NFL history. This past offseason, the league changed the starting field position for a touchback on a dynamic kickoff from the 30-yard line out to the 35-yard line in an effort to increase return rates. And boy, did it ever work. Teams could stomach having their defenses start drives at the 30-yard line last year because at least that was still semi-manageable for them. The average scoring drive percentage from that starting field position was about 38%, but for drives starting just 5 yards further at the 35-yard line, that average scoring drive percentage goes up to just under 44%. If you compare that roughly 44% of a touchback to the 35 to the potential average scoring drive percentage if you can get a good coverage unit and bottle up a returner at, say, the 25-yard line, that scoring drive percentage drops all the way down to 33.6%. That is a huge swing for just 10 yards. So for special teams coordinators everywhere, they are now heavily incentivized to avoid touchbacks and try to just block and tackle their asses off on these returns in order to win that field position battle. As a result of that incentive from this new rule tweak, return rates have exploded this year up to 79.3%, more than double the rate from 2024 of just 34%. And keep in mind, the average starting field position hasn't really changed that much. It's the 30-yard line this year, just like it was the 30-yard line last year. But the difference is that 30-yard line average starting field position in 2024 was because there were so many touchbacks. This year, it's because there's so many returns and they're averaging to about the 30. Meaning we're getting a roughly equal number of huge kick returns that give the offense good field position, as we are getting brutally efficient kickoff coverage that gives the defense good field position. That's what puts the dynamic in the dynamic kickoff. Either unit can get a huge advantage on the subsequent drive. This dichotomy between great special teams units that pop returns and have good coverage versus bad special teams units that maybe don't pop returns or have really poor kickoff coverage, that's accounted for a massive amount of hidden yardage so far this season. And in some ways, it actually makes offenses and defenses look better or worse than they actually are. Take the Week 3 game between the Rams and the Eagles as an example. This was a matchup between two very good special teams units. The Rams had 6 real kickoffs in that game, 4 in the first half and 2 in the second half, and because of the emerging new kicking technique of their kicker, Joshua Carty, which we're going to get to in just a moment, the Eagles' average starting field position on those 6 drives was all the way down at their own 14-yard line. The Eagles did end up winning this game because of their own special teams unit, ironically, but on those 6 drives that started from kickoffs, they punted on 4 of them, they turned it over on another one, and they only had 1 scoring drive on the day after a kickoff. You could easily argue that one of the main reasons why the Rams were even controlling that game to begin with in the first half was because of the inherent macro advantages their kickoff unit was giving them. In total, they saved between 100 to 120 yards of field position for their own defense just from those 6 kickoffs alone. It was truly devastating work by Carty all throughout the day. I mean, these returners were just in hell. Which, of course, brings me to the kicks themselves and why they were so effective in the first place. There was one more subtle rule change from this past offseason involving equipment managers and kickers. Under the old rules, NFL equipment managers had to open up fresh footballs right out of the box on game day, and they would only get a 60-minute window on that game day to prepare these balls for their kickers, known as K-balls. And in that window, they would somehow have to get them to feel and perform the way their kickers wanted them to feel and perform. Now, starting this season, teams have been allowed to pre-prepare their K-balls before game day and work out all the stiff, slick coating that gives these kickers problems on freshly opened balls, similar to the process that they use for dialing in normal game balls for quarterbacks. All of the K-balls are inspected by officials before the game, just like usual, but this new rule change has been a boon for kickers who like to put a little bit of extra English on their kickoffs and who need that surface of the ball to be as rough as permissible in order to do so. Brandon Aubrey of the Cowboys, Joshua Carty of the Rams, and Ryan Fitzgerald of the Panthers are 3 of the kickers who have benefited the most from this change, with Carty and Fitzgerald in particular already pulling off some ridiculous feats with their kickoffs this season. They are all pioneering a new kind of kickoff, colloquially known as a knuckleball kick or a dirty kick, and the properties of this kind of kickoff are just nuts. Rather than rotating end over end like a traditional kickoff would fly, the knuckle kick has the ball fly flat on its side, sorta, with most of the rotation being from like a roll on the longitudinal axis rather than the vertical axis. Think of it like throwing a spiral, but sideways, kinda? It's just a really weird and hard kickoff to handle because it's so unpredictable both in the air and on the ground, and it's at least partially only possible because of all the treatment these equipment staffs can do to these K-balls now to get them to be as grippy as they are. Another aspect to the effectiveness of this kick is how quickly it hits the ground now because it's more of a line drive trajectory rather than a pop fly. Last season, just for reference, the average hang time for kickoffs on returns was about 3.9 seconds, but now league-wide it's down to about 3.3 in 2025. That's about a 15% decrease in hang time so far this season. And that 0.6 seconds doesn't sound like a lot, but that is a huge reduction in the amount of time that returners have to read the ball in the air and try to track where and how it's going to land. And on top of that, when kickers drop the ball quickly and have it bounce in front of the returner, it helps out their coverage teams too. Remember, the rule states that as soon as the ball hits the landing zone, coverage players are allowed to move. The returner doesn't have to touch it first. So if a kicker puts an awkward bounce 5 to 8 yards ahead of a returner, as Fitzgerald likes to do in Carolina, it creates situations like this one, where the coverage unit gets to gain 5 yards of ground by the time the ball even bounces its way to the return man, and if he doesn't field it cleanly, which, let's be honest, these kicks are hard as hell to field cleanly in the first place, by the time the returner does actually get the ball in his hands, the coverage unit is already on top of him. It's extremely hard to get an effective return against a kickoff like this, and the numbers that prove it are already staggering. Last year, in 2024, there were 5 teams tied at the top of the league with just 6 total kickoffs the entire year that resulted in their opponent's starting field position inside their own 20-yard line. Just 3 weeks into 2025, and Cardi himself already matched that season high. He already had 6 kickoffs that pinned the opposing offense inside their own red zone. And when it comes to pinning offenses inside their own 10-yard lines on kickoffs, nobody managed to do that more than twice last season, while Fitzgerald has already done that for the Panthers 3 times in 2025. The advantage that some of these kickers can give their teams with all this hidden yardage is just unbelievable. And that's before we even broach the topic of field goal distances this season and how that has changed scoring drive potential league-wide. Just for reference, I'm recording this about 20 minutes after Chase McLaughlin drilled a 65-yard field goal for the Bucs against Philly today, and it was like he didn't even break a sweat. The make percentage on field goals over 50 yards this season is 75%. That's a 5% boost year over year from 2024. And that's also while the rate of 50-plus yard attempts is going up too. We saw about 16.4 attempts from that distance per week across the league last season. So far this year, we're at 20 per week. Overall, because of the rule changes to K-ball preparation, as well as the change in the touchback spot, having a great kicker has never been more crucial. And believe me, if you don't have a great kicker, whether you realize it or not, you will feel the effects of that hole in the roster on every single drive. All right, that's going to wrap it up for me today over here, but reminder, I do even more content every single week over on our podcast channel, the Bootleg Football Podcast. Even after doing that show for like 5-6 years at this point, I still find that there's people in my audience here that don't realize that I have a podcast. So if you want even more from me and you're not sick of me already, again, you can find me over on the Bootleg Football Podcast channel. And in the meantime, thank you for watching, and I'll see you again very soon.